You say 1, 2, 3. Okay. Well, hello everyone. Welcome for this first session of the webinar series hosted by the Indian Pastoral Network. As you all know, the network is aiming at putting together people doing research, engaged with pastoralist communities in India. And the objective of this series of seminar is to start a conversation among us and to get this conversation going on about pastoralist people in India and how does the COVID-19 impact pastoralists. There have been a few reports, some papers in news released about some impacts on different communities, and we've seen that, well, the impact and the situation can be very different from one state to the other, from one community to the other. And the idea here is to bring in some people who have been doing research during this time, let's say during this year, to tell us what they've seen, what they understood about the situation, what kind of problems pastoralists were faced with, and also what kind of problems researchers have been faced with doing research in this new situation. So I think we can use this webinar series to address three main things, three main points. The first one would be looking at the impacts of the COVID-19 and the lockdowns, curfews, different decisions that have been made on the life of pastoralists. Okay, and this is a huge question with many aspects, I think, to deal with. The second point we could make the discussion revolves around is about doing research in time of COVID-19. And today's presentation is about this aspect. What does it mean to do research in a remote settings, by phone, by, I don't know, through WhatsApp, whatever. And the third point I think is important also to deal with is what will it change for the future of doing research with pastoral communities? It's clear that the situation is not the same now, so we have to think about new questions to be asked and maybe abandon or change the issues we wanted to work on before and adapt to the new situation of pastoralists and to the new context. Okay, so today we have the luck to host a presentation that will be made by Saee Pawar and Rujuta about the challenge in research during COVID-19. And I will let Nitya Godge from Antra introduce the speakers.
Thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning to some, and good afternoon, good day to others. I'm really happy that we have managed to hold the seminar, at least, something that I think was hatched in February last year in Pune. Is that right, Matthew? We were working on the template for having a seminar workshop like this last year, and it was really unfortunate that COVID came and has created a few problems. I think in this group, most of you know me. I'm Nitya Godge from Mantra, and many, many familiar faces here. Hello to Archana. Hello out there. I didn't say hello to you. So the pandemic has actually thrown all our lives more or less upside down, and some of us more than others. And we've had to shift to a new way of working from home. Unfortunately, work from home doesn't really help when you have to do research. And as a veterinarian with a scientific, my background is basically science. So research for science is difficult if you don't visit your lab or your structure, but I think social sciences also is really challenged by the situation we have before us. So I would like to introduce two young researchers who are with us, who are with Antra, Rujuta and Saee. For those of you who may not know Antra, we are an organization based in Pune in India, Maharashtra, started by two women veterinarians. I'm one of them. And we started with livestock health and then have gone into livelihoods and landscapes, pastoralist, biodiversity, rest of the news on our website. But to introduce the two participants who've been working with us for the last year, Rujuta holds a master's in anthropology from the University of Pune. And she worked with tribal communities on a the Indian Council of Medical Research Health project in Palghar district of Maharashtra before she joined Antra. So she shifted actually from tribal communities to pastoralists, and I think we managed to change her line focus of interest. I'll also introduce Saee. Saee holds a master's in sociology from the University of Pune, and Saee writes rather well. I mean, she's written a number of papers popular articles in newspapers and magazines. And besides her research skills, she likes to take the research findings into into spaces where she can share it with other people, a readership which is wider than our research community. Over to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nitya, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending where everyone is. Okay, so I will just quickly introduce what our focus of the presentation is. Essentially, we had interviewed 10 women from different parts of Maharashtra, 10 women from Dhangar community in Maharashtra, uh, from the months of June to August, June and July and August. Um, and we had conducted mostly phone interviews because during this time the lockdown was implemented and it wasn't possible to travel and do field work. Uh, and so these were semi-structured interviews. We had a loosely uh, framed set of questions, and we managed to cover all that. But the way to go about it was through conversation and not, one question after the other. So it was an in-depth, semi-structured interview, and normally in regular fieldwork, in in-person interview, the way we would go about these in-depth interviews is like first of all just spending a lot of time with the respondents. We could the picture here, for example, we are at a Dhangar Wada here. We had spent a whole day. We reached there in the morning, and then in the morning we talked to other members of the family, and then in the afternoon when Banubai here in this picture, when she finished her chores, we sat down and we spoke to her. In in-person interview, a lot of time and attention is required, which changed when we try to do phone interviews. Um, and because we were interviewing women specifically, there were other challenges. Even when we're doing in-person interviews, talking to women is a little bit tricky because in most communities in India, even in tribal and rural communities, and especially in pastoral communities, women don't talk openly or in front of their family members or in front of other people. So to get them to talk is a little bit tricky. Uh, so usually the two of us, me and Ruchita, would go on the field, and one person would talk to, the man of the family or the other members present there, and keep them occupied. And during that time, the other one would go and talk to the woman who is doing some chores, cooking, cleaning, or other things. And to get them to talk, first we would begin with just chit chatting, talking about the weather, how was the travel, how are the animals, and then through conversation, once we have built a rapport, once they have gotten comfortable being around us, then we would start asking questions and would start with general questions, and then would proceed towards questions that are a little bit sensitive or not easy to articulate for us or easy to answer for them. uh, so, so this is even in regular field work, while doing qualitative data collection, while doing in-depth interviews. This is the way we would go. Ruchita, can you change the slide? Yeah. And so in during the lockdown, during July, August, because we could not travel, we did phone interviews exclusively. Uh, so with phone interviews, the basic process of interview changed radically. Uh, the most significant factor to me felt like the time, because as I said earlier, in we would spend we should ideally spend a day with the respondents, talking to them and bringing up questions in general conversation. That wasn't possible in phone interviews. We had to a call could last only 20 to 30 minutes, and so we had to really ask questions in a rapid manner, which the quality of answer we got was not the same as what we would get in in-person interview. So I'll just list the main factors that changed or became more difficult with phone interviews. So firstly, scheduling was quite tough. How we had arranged the phone interviews was basically it was a conference call. uh, Rujita and I and Sangeeta from Antara, who is who is familiar with a lot of families from Dhankar community. She has a rapport with them. She's known them for several years, and her being present was crucial to phone interviews. Rujita will talk about that in detail later. But the three of us and the respondent would be on a conference call. Uh, and then we would start the interview. So while scheduling this, we had to make sure each party had uh, a particular sort of time free. The If the respondents were traveling, if they were in an area where they were getting network, all these things factored in scheduling, and a lot of variables we had to consider to only scheduling the interview. So a lot of time went in that. uh, Second, then other challenges that came was connectivity. So the lot of respondents did not have access to phone like exclusively for themselves. One mobile phone is shared among like two, three family members a lot of times. And if one family member is away, then the phone is with them, so you cannot reach. And the phone is usually with the man when he goes out. So if you want to talk to women, we had to wait till evening or later in the night when everyone has come back home and everyone is at one place and we can talk to the woman. Another problem with phones were because they were constantly traveling, or even if they weren't traveling, they had set up their vadas sometimes outside the village. And with COVID and lockdown, for a lot of them, entering the village was an issue. So to charge the battery of the phone was a problem for them. And they would manage to charge it in someone's house or in a shop, but they would have to make sure that the phone battery would last for as long as possible. So we had to schedule the call like maximum 20 to 30 minutes, not more than that. There were like, so it happened couple of times that we were like in middle of the interview, the phone died, and then we had to wait for 2 more days to get in touch with them. So these were uh, primary challenges. And then uh, Some respondents, especially women, were not comfortable talking on the phone for a long time, and there was not much we could do as interviewers to make them comfortable in that situation. And we could really feel their discomfort, or if uh, if there were no there were children around them, their other family members, we could hear the noises in the background, and it was not a very ideal setting to ask in-depth questions and to get layered and nuanced experiences of these women. uh, the other thing, as I mentioned before, normally we would build a rapport with the respondent and then move towards the questions, which could not be done in phone interviews. Uh, in like when we started the call, Sangeeta would talk to them for like first 5 minutes, just chatting, and then we would move towards the interview. But it did not feel as organic as it should, as it would have in in-person interview. Uh, we moved very quickly from one question to the other. It felt more like we were filling up a survey form than doing a qualitative interview. Uh, uh, and there was not much we could do in this situation to to get them to talk if they stop talking, or like in some cases the women just gave the phone to their children or their husband and went away in middle of the interview, and there was nothing we could do but like ask them to like come back and finish the interview. uh, so these were the challenges, like what we say, to get the respondent talk to us, challenges in that. And specific to women, we had some challenges. Compared to men, women are more shy towards technology. So in some cases, when we were calling women, their husband would talk to us longer than the women themselves, and then we would have to request to get her on the phone back, uh, which would not happen in in-person interview. But in phone interviews, there are most women, not all of them, but most women are quite shy to talk on the phone for a very long time. And other thing is that women are constantly working and doing some or the other chore. It could be anything: cleaning, preparing meals, cooking, looking after children, looking after the animals. They are constantly working. So even when we do in-person interview, we talk to them while they are working. So if they are cooking, we sit next to them and talk to them. They don't have to take time out, especially for the interview. But in case of phone interviews, that couldn't happen. We had to ask them that, after dinner, could you keep aside half an hour? We would call you then. And I think that I put some burden on them to sort of, get this time out just for the interview, which showed even in the interview process that by the end of the interview, they were in a hurry. They were not answering questions uh, in detail. They just wanted to get it over with as soon as possible. But and then we would have to finish one interview in 2-3 calls rather than in a single go. But Rujita will talk about that later. And then major drawbacks of this method was we could not observe the non-verbal cues or the surroundings these respondents were in. Normally, in when you go and visit them during field work, there are small things that you observe as a researcher: the way they are dressed, the way they carry themselves, the way they talk amongst each other. And even when you're asking questions, when you ask sensitive questions, if they're hesitating, if they're not making eye contact, the body language is telling you they're not comfortable. All these things give very valuable information, which, which like this data is just as valuable as direct answers we get, and it really helps us to contextualize what direct answer the answers are giving us. And lack of this, non-verbal cues and not being able to observe their surroundings, how their vada is set, how far is it from the village, is there a road nearby, all these things that we could see in fieldwork, we could not. And with lack of substantial secondary data, we could not cross check what they were telling us is what was really happening. So these were the major drawbacks, which sort of made us question after the interviews the reliability of the data and how to process it further. Okay, Rujita will continue from the next slide. Rujita?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. My name is Rujuta and I will be continuing. So essentially, when we started talking to people, we realized that we were going to have to do something differently, like I mentioned. And I had done a few interviews at the beginning of the lockdown with farmers from another district, and they were without any middle person. They were scheduled according to their convenience, but they were without a middle person. And that's something that I think that Sai highlighted the importance of having someone that they know and trust or have known for years was was really felt, because then Sangeeta, if most of you have been to Ansara or have, you might know Sangeeta, is someone who's been with Ansara for, am I audible now? Yeah. Okay. Um, yeah. So she's someone who keeps contact with these communities to an extent that is maybe more than a researcher or just someone who goes to document them. They keep in touch with her over social media. They update her about their lives. They tell her when their livestock is unwell or when somebody from their family is unwell. When there are weddings, she gets invitations. So the connection that she has is something that is really special, and she's nurtured that over all these years. So having her on the call was one way to really uh, put the women at some amount of ease. It did not work every time because obviously there were so many other factors um, that affected it. Also, one drawback of that, to be honest, is also that there were then too many people on the call in terms of just, for the research, like for the participant and the respondent to then understand who is it that they're talking to, it could get a little overwhelming. But having her definitely had more benefits than drawbacks. Another very important thing was, like I mentioned, was to schedule the call according to their convenience. So that could be at any time of the day. It could be early morning before they decide to leave, or it could be later in the night, or when they tell us that they're going to reach a particular village where they will get network or be able to recharge their phones or be able to, have enough battery to talk to us. So um, that had to be entirely rethought in terms of, not when we can visit or when it'd be easy for us to go someplace or when the weather is a certain way, but when the women would have time to sit down and talk to us to an extent. And yeah, again, many different things. Another thing that we did at Antara was we recharged a lot of telephone numbers of the people who were, in the circle or who we had to talk to, so that we could also talk to them in terms of putting in money into their, phones. So they had the ability to then have these conversations with us, and that reduced one of the variables that would make it difficult to have these conversations. We also, from the very beginning, not just in terms of the calls, but also in terms of how the interview was structured, we broke it up into multiple portions because we knew that it would be extremely difficult to have a continuous 1.5 hour interaction like you would in the field. Like you might not talk to them continuously, but the amount of time you spend there would be a significant amount of time, and there would be many different small interactions that would build up to a longer interaction. And we knew that that would be very, very difficult to have. So the interview schedule in itself was broken up into 2 or 3, uh, subsections that were all related to each other or that would tie into each other. So in the case that the respondent was not as forthcoming, we could in fact then move from one section to another, revisit the section. So we sort of kept it what we will call a schedule. So it was fluid, and it was quite flexible, so you could go back and forth in that sense. Another very important thing, and I know that some of us do this even when we're not doing, even when, like, in addition to fieldwork. So, for example, I know that Kritika, is in touch with the people from the villages that she goes to in terms of, what the women are putting up on their WhatsApp, or getting a lot of updates from other sources. And that was a very good way for us to get information in the lockdown. So again, like I mentioned earlier, Sangeeta is in touch with um, a lot of these women and families socially, not just as a researcher or as someone from an NGO. So she could see when there were updates of weddings happening or get-togethers or gatherings, because it would be up on their story or it would be up in their own group. And then we could talk to them about it. Without this insight, we would not have been able to reach this conversation or get to know about this occurring, because we were not going there, or we were not being able to travel. So that was one thing. And another thing that we had in mind in terms of photos. So, like, the first photo that you saw on the slide is one that I took when Saee and I had gone to Vangaon. Um, and so when we go to the field, we're obviously looking at the field and people in a certain way, right? We're interpreting their lives in a certain way. But smartphones, a lot of younger people and families that we know have smartphones nowadays. And we thought it'd be also interesting to see how they document their own lives in terms of how is it that, they see their reality. And in fact, I think people like Qatar, or like we get regular updates on the Ansra group anyway when they start migrating, or photos of their flocks. And it's really interesting in terms of alternative data points, because it really tells you how a community views itself. And maybe as an anthropologist or sociologist, you understand the importance of how you understand yourself and how then the community is seeing themselves. So these were some of the small things that we tried to overcome the larger drawbacks. Where they're not foolproof, they were adaptations, and I'll get to that in the conclusion. Um, so it's not entirely fair to call these conclusions, because they're not really set in stone. They're more of like concluding thoughts, I would say. Um, One thing that we would say is that it was difficult, but it wasn't impossible to get in touch with communities. It was maybe difficult to get in touch with them consistently, but that's also given the nature of their traveling, or them being, in one village one time or another village another time. But we also know that to be true in terms of on-field research. Like, that's not significantly different from when you go visit a community. And the only thing is that now it depends on whether they have network connectivity or whether they have charge. And these are simply newer variables that we didn't have to depend so much on earlier. Um, but there are alternative ways of keeping in touch with communities that have sprung up. Um, Another thing that came up in another discussion that we were a part of was that there are communities that are in themselves doing many things to support themselves amongst themselves when the main schools are shut, or the ones who are educated who have come back from the cities are teaching the children while their schools are shut. And that sort of made us think about how we need to have more individuals from within the community who are middle people, who can continue this process of gathering of information, or looking at cultural practices and traditions as information, the way that you or I would as researchers, because it is information and they are living amongst it. So if anybody was to collect it, it would in fact be significantly easier for them to do it, not just because of COVID, but also in general. I feel like that would be an interesting research practice. Um, uh, uh, Something that we were really hesitant about, and I don't think it's entirely left our minds. And I can see a few people here who I have also had this conversation with in terms of the methods we were using. And like I said, they're not fully methods that maybe we were trained in, or maybe you could read in a book or attend a workshop about. They were all abridged and adapted from a mix of methods. And it was frankly us just trying to see what would work and what wouldn't. and that made it very difficult to assure interviewer um, you know stability, in terms of not every interview was the same, not every interviewer was the same. I mean, they never are, and I know that, but just whether the method would hold any water in itself, if it was to, be analyzed by anybody else, was something that we thought of often, in terms of whether it's something, because it's not something that's been, say, documented as much, whether it was as good a way of collecting information or as valid a way of collecting information. It also made it very difficult to contextualize the information we were getting in, because every week was different from the next, because every time we would call them, something different had happened, or some new rule was in form, or all of these things. Their lives were changing if they were traveling from every village to village. It became also very difficult to contextualize this in a very helpful way. Like, when you look at the information that we have, it feels a little bit like it's all over the place, because that's also a little bit like the pandemic was, because there was no real structure to their experiences also. And also, given that oftentimes when women had heard about the lockdown or the pandemic, they were either from secondary sources or from their families, from their husbands, from their children. And it was often the experiences of others that they would recount to us, and not necessarily always their own experiences, which we had no control over, because we were only talking to them over the phone. So there was no way for us to recheck this information, or go another time and find out if it was true, talk to somebody else who was traveling with them to know if that was their experience as well. It was also very difficult for us to really separate, say, an individual or a woman, take them into confidence, and then talk to them about things that we could have otherwise in person. Because there were times also when we could hear somebody telling them the answers from the background, and there was no way to really uh, address that, which we could have in person. So the I think the authenticity, not in terms of, I'm not challenging whether what the women were telling us is true or not, but in terms of whether we could verify it or not, or whether we could recheck it or not, was something that we were really questioning at the end of this. So I'm sorry, the conclusion feels a little bit like an existential, rant on our behalf, but it's just something as young researchers that we felt very often when we were doing this, or while we were asking these questions about, how do you feel about the lockdown, or what did this make you feel, or were you scared, or were you upset? And often when you ask these questions, they seem less meaningful, because there's so much more at stake on that side for the woman. So I think that's about it from our side. Sai, do you want to add anything?
No.
Stop share.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much. Very interesting presentation, and a lot of questions have been raised, actually. So as a first thing, I don't know if anyone wants to ask questions and so on. It's very open. But could you tell us a little bit more about the topic you were doing research on with women?
Yeah, we were actually asking them about their experiences of COVID and then subsequent lockdowns, because
Okay.
some of them were not in their villages. Some of them they were in different parts of the state and were in the process of traveling back to their villages, which had to happen during the lockdown or where the lockdown was announced. So our questions were basically focusing on what they understood by this pandemic. How did they understand that this new disease had come, and the the public spaces that they utilize so frequently were shutting down, like markets, shops, everything was shut. They were not they were not allowed to enter these spaces anymore. How did they make sense of all of this, and how did they understand corona or covid as a different disease than other diseases like flus and other things that they encounter and we encounter every year? And what were the challenges they were faced with the lockdown, with the markets and roads and everything closed, no public transport, and what strategies did they use to, sort of overcome or sidestep these challenges? Yeah,
Could I
that.
just add? Could I just add to the whole thing, because I think Saee, Kritika, Nitya, they are all working with us on Project Herding. So my name is Archana. I'm new to quite a few of you. And I work in Leeds University with Professor Dyer. And this is how I came into this link. And what kind of, we have done this, we are working on the project called Herding for last few years, which is looking at pastoralist women and dignity, which is changing with kind of, now the pastoralism is changing. And also we are looking at rising Hindutva and how it affects Hindu and Muslim pastoralist community in India. So that's kind of rough thing. And the COVID happened in the middle of the research process. And we thought we need to include what is the impact of COVID on women, dignity, and other areas. So Sai has been doing these interviews, Kritika has been doing some interviews with those women and their experiences. Antra and especially Nitya has been coordinating the project in India, in Indian side. So kind of, she's also quite involved with the whole process. So that's a kind of little background of the whole research. And adding to this, issues on methodology, because we are sitting here in Leeds and we were also trying to do some interviews ourselves, because we were focusing into a Rabari residential school. There are two views we wanted to explore. One is pastoralist, kind of education is an escape route from pastoralism for a lot of pastoralists. And then a lot of those children who are in residential education were forced to go back to their families. And the impact of education provision to on those children was another issue we were looking at, and we were interviewing quite a few people. It was very, very difficult because it was a monsoon time, so pastoralists were on a higher ground, so accessing the mobile network itself was an issue. Secondly, talking to girls is absolutely impossible in those situations, because we also wanted to directly talk to girls, their experiences in terms of going back to pastoralism in that situation. That was really, really difficult. Kritika has done a lot of work with young people in this particular village, where we have seen quite different issues and kind of associated negatively, especially women and use of mobile phone in a modern context. And she has done a fantastic job, and it is very interesting because she could be part of that mobile culture within the young people, and how it is affecting their lives. So that has been really, really very, very interesting work she has done there. So just kind of, few points I'm adding. Over to Sai and Rujuta and other questions.
May I say something? I wanted to take off from the point you mentioned about how people see their own situations when they photograph themselves or research themselves, and that for me was very interesting. And I was wondering if we could in future research, I want to link it to the question that Matthew had about future research issues, challenges, methodologies, and whether we could budget for people in their rural area. I mean, things are changing. We have more literate people back in the, it's different from when we were researching, say, 10 or 15 years back. So is it possible for young people in the communities then to have phones, to record their daily lives, to record things which matter to them, and have that as part of the methodology in future projects we have on research? So I'm just throwing a question.
We definitely are doing this because we are in a process of developing a website, and we are asking a lot of pastoralists now to send us their own experience, their WhatsApp messages, their whatever they see themselves as a pastoralist. And I'm hoping that that collection we will be able to publish within the website. And I think it's a very important resource nowadays, the social media. And I don't think we can, and it is bringing value into the pastoralist research and how they feel. And also pastoralists themselves have started talking about their own issues in a very different platform, which is very important.
I would like to add something to this. There is also a negative effect of using WhatsApp because there is a lot of fake news which is being circulating within the group. So all the pastoralist Rabaris have their own WhatsApp group where they share things like the Muslim community have come and attacked us or something like that. So the small issues which are isolated now has become like a big thing, and many more people are involved, and political parties get involved in that small little issues, which will create problems eventually.
Because it was very interesting, because we have been working a Muslim community, a Sufi community rather, Fakirani Jats in Kutch. And there was a video within them, a viral video about, the camel deaths in Australia. And they have a very strong relationship with the camels. And their feeling was, because those camels were killed, and now we are facing the consequences as a curse from their peer, because the camels were hurt in Australia, and the COVID pandemic is a kind of result of that action. So and this is WhatsApp group, and this is how they are communicating this information, creating new ideas and the new realities. So it was very interesting, what's happening in that community. It's just an example.
I'd like to add here that in one of our questions was, what did you hear about this coronavirus from the news? And they did not, in lot of cases, they did not know the symptoms of the disease or things like that. But almost everyone knew that this disease has come from China, and they would say that that's the first thing that came from them. And the Chinese people have sent this disease. But the factual information, that is like, the symptoms of the disease, what would you do if you see these symptoms, that information very few people could tell us. So even because they get WhatsApp is a major source of information. They get news on their family groups and stuff. So the kind of news that is reaching them is also, we need to look at the quality of information about the rest of the world reaching these people.
I do think so that one thing is that information coming to us through the internet or through social media, but another thing is that most of the women we spoke to, their children were not attending online schools. They actually had no idea what their children, I mean, whether they were studying or whether the schools were on or whether when they would return to school. So I feel like technology is useful and it can be a great source of information, but there are also so many other avenues in which we can be applying it, and they're not getting through entirely. So that was also upsetting, I guess.
I had a question regarding one of your methods, the one where you two were in the field and one was keeping the male household head busy while going at the woman for information. In a sense, without like, I mean, I'm using the word lightly, but it's a technique of deception in a sense, right? And I was just interested to know if at some point some of uh, the household heads were aware of what was happening. And I want to mention that actually that the same thing happened to me. I was working with sometimes one or two field work assistants, but my Hindi allows me to have basic conversation on certain topics. So I didn't need my assistant all of the time. And one of my assistant was a female journalist actually, and she would do the same. Just like she would leave the conversation when it was going very well with someone I knew from many years. And so since I was confident I could handle by myself, she would just go and complete based on her own research and documentary interest, and she would come back with all this information, and didn't feel like I was cheating the whole process, if I can say, because I never expected to have a wealth of information like that, and she was doing it kind of on her own, and we were complementing each other in that sense. And she was very she was leading the way in some sense in those fields and questions I didn't expect. In your case, it was I I had the feeling it was deliberate. So I would like you to expand on this a little bit, and to understand if at some point the men were aware of what was going on that little game was going on in their place.
I feel like Sai and I have been seeing this since our Palghar fieldwork, where it's very difficult to really separate a woman from the work she's doing or the family. And if you listen to most of our interviews with women, there are always children in the background who are crying or screaming or shouting because the kids are always on them or around them. Um, but I mean, that's still okay because they're not interrupting in the interview. But it's often when men start answering for the women, and a lot of these projects, like at least when I was visiting Vanga for the first time, her whole focus was to interview the woman and to get her perspective. But very often it's very difficult because the first people who will interact with you when you go to the field is the men of the family, because they also are more comfortable with that interaction. So it, I mean, I wouldn't deny that. I mean, deception is not entirely a wrong word to use. It's more of a distraction, I would say, because it's. I mean, we want, even if it's the same thing that the man was going to say, we'd like to hear it from the woman. So it's a good way to like take on the entire family and to sort of, it's not that we're not asking questions to the other people, but I mean, yeah, maybe Sai can
Uh,
expand.
yeah, also about the part where if the men were aware that we are doing that, I maybe in not in all cases, but in some cases they definitely were. So in Vangav, in one of the interviews, Khatal, they took us to another Vada to interview this other woman, Ranjana Bai, and then when we were talking to her, he was answering the questions addressed to her, and this went on for some time, and then he also realized that the what the data we want is from the woman, and we're not getting that. And so he left us there and he said, I will come back in some time. And so he left us there for an hour. We're like, you sit and talk, take your time, relax and talk. So they also, I think, somewhere know that, because women, when men are present, women won't talk 90% of the time. It's
Especially the
only,
younger ones.
yeah, especially the younger ones. Uh, and like sometimes the questions are also a little sensitive, that they shy away from answering those in front of other people. So like men are aware at some level that when talking to women, this technique works best. So
Not only did Qatar leave, he took all the other men with him also.
Yeah, he took all the other men and the children with him and just left us with the responding.
Excellent, thank you. And I have just a short question also regarding phone interviews. Did you notice that some question formats worked better, or is there something that you would like to try in terms of changing questionnaire, the scope of the questionnaire in the future?
Yeah, so yeah,
No, go for it.
okay, no, I was gonna say that the the questions that required like specific information, like a question about where they go to buy their groceries, that like the questions that had specific answers, they were able to give us the answers. But more vague questions that sort of the answers are not in one sentence or one word, that they sort of come up organically in conversation. Those kind of questions, I felt we couldn't do justice to them in a phone interview because of the time restraint and like us not being there and not being able to observe them. Uh, yeah, it was just
Also, it's difficult to get a flow in a phone interview. So in an in-person interview, not just are you physically able to sort of put them at ease and establish like non-verbal interaction with them, but also there's a flow after which they open up a little bit. Because no matter how much you try with someone who you're talking to for the first time, who you've never met, most of the interaction becomes very transactional in terms of yes no questions or survey questions or like closed questions. Mainly those are significantly easier. A lot of how do you feel about this, what do you think of this, when will this end, those the abstract ones like I mentioned are very difficult to um, even with prompts to sort of get answers to sometimes.
for example, we had the
Then it
question
becomes
that like,
leading.
yeah, like how did you feel that now that all the jatras are cancelled, the and you are not able to see your relatives for a very long time, like how do you feel about that? So they just said we feel bad, and that's where the question ended. When if we were talking to them, we could have probed further and got more qualitative, like layered information. That questions like this did not work in phone interview.
Thank you.
Here, if I may add to your question of the men, I would refrain from using the word deception at this point.
It is actually in different research fields. It is used as such. So that's why I was like, I don't like the word myself, but I know of like certain research protocol, they use it deliberately. Yeah.
No, I know, but we've had to use it all the time because as Saee and Rujuta has said, usually when you go into a community and you sit there, then there is one person who's from the community who thinks he or she is the spokesperson and believes that the rest of the community is ignorant or doesn't have ideas or doesn't have an opinion, and that's wrong. So you start that wrong. So unless that spokesperson can be effectively engaged, handled, or left out of the discussion, the others just don't get a chance to participate. So
Thank you, Nitya. It really feels you're describing my fieldwork experience as well.
No, but because we've faced this for years.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think we are all in the same boat because we always do that. We use this whole, I think when me and Professor Caroline used to do the fieldwork together, we always played this, honorary man. This is how it works. It's a culturally bound stuff in a particular cultural setup. So deception, I also don't kind of agree with it, or using that word.
But at the same time, it
how
isn't.
people communicate.
Yes, but the word is generating conversation that I find quite interesting, and it reaches deep in our experience as researchers as well. So maybe there's a certain property to the word that I actually like now for its generative capacity.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I don't think we've actually met before. I was
Hi
just
there.
trying to remember some Shakespeare then, but failing. What does it Shakespeare saying something about when we first practiced to deceive? And then I couldn't remember the second line.
I do not know this passage. Thank
Hi,
you.
Matthew. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I should
Hi,
go away and look for it.
Caroline.
Saee Rajastra, I'm also seeing you for the first time. I've heard loads about you. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you.
Is
Um,
there any other questions? I'm feeling we could stop this recording session. Thank our presenters for a very engaged material. Mathieu, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, if we take this thread and try to pull it out, like this means if we are stuck to do some phone interviews instead of being there in person, this means that the whole logic and the whole balance and art of the in-person interview is tweaked, and we have to kind of imagine new ways of trying to get the information through different ways and so on. For example, deceptions. How do you do that by phone? Like, can you give me this person only? And so maybe it's easier because you can just directly ask, can I talk to this woman or this person directly? So, and the person you interview can go a little bit aside and respond directly. But I don't know. I think there are many things to think about there.
Yeah, I think there are lots of
Yeah.
things to think
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. Or maybe we have to, like, regarding the questions, you can, as Saee was saying, you cannot ask quite general question about how do you feel and so on, trying to dig a little bit on this kind of topics. So this means you can only collect quite superficial information by phone, and then how do you deal with the other kind of information and understanding you need? These are
Also, even
just
if
the
you ask for a specific person, there's always like a chance that someone is prompting the answers from behind, which you can hear sometimes also.
Yeah, in some cases we heard someone talking in the background, like telling them
Yeah,
the answers, and the woman was
and then them
repeating.
repeating. Yeah.
yeah,
So
okay,
that
yeah.
also, like, you don't know if you're on speaker or if you're talking to the whole family or if you're talking to one person when you're asking the questions. So you also have to keep checking yourself in terms of,
Yeah.
what is it that you're saying. I don't know the answer.
Okay.
Rujita, but Rujita, like you yourself said, we then employed a middle person.
Yeah.
It could be a Sangeeta or a person from the community or someone there who then collects a particular question. So if they were uncomfortable speaking about certain kinds of things with us or with you and Saee, because you didn't know, you, both of you, because then we would ask Sangeeta to ask a more sensitive question. So we tried to find ways around this. It's not easy, but you're right. We'll have to explore new ways. So you have
But then
a person from the community.
Yeah.
because we were exploring, every interview was differently structured and was different, and the interviewer was different every time. And then when you go back to analyzing those interviews, that becomes difficult sometimes to hold anything constant or compare anything to anything for that matter. Um, uh, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Also, I think the middle person who is from the community either or is very familiar, like Sangeeta is, with members of the community, that really help, because I think me and Rajita, we cannot imagine doing these interviews if Sangeeta was not on the line with us, because we both speak good Marathi and we would frame the question in understandable, simple language. But that question wouldn't get an answer. But if Sangeeta repeated the exact same question, they would answer to that very happily and in detail. So I think that's the most crucial point. Like someone they have met, they're very familiar with, very comfortable with already. To
In
have
that
that person, yeah.
just like I'm not trying to if I was to nitpick, the only thing is because this individual has spent so much time with the community, they could sometimes just answer the question for them. If I'm asking this woman how many children does she have, or how many, sheep in her flock, or where do they go, it could just sometimes come from the community person or someone close to them, where in fact I want the respondent to talk to me, and respond to me. So that ownership, that feeling of I connect with this community can sometimes extend to speaking on behalf of the community to ease the process, but it doesn't always help in the terms of a traditional interview process. um but I'm nitpicking yeah.
Yeah, okay, all right. Thank you. Maybe a way is also, to work through middle persons who would collect like more complex narratives, for example, with audio recorder and asking, please tell me about what you think about this issue, or how do you feel, and then afterwards working on this material from remote area. Okay, right. Do we have some more questions?
Dada, any question? Vinal? Natasha, do you have a question?
No, I don't have a question. I'm enjoying listening to this conversation and I'll think about it. Thank you.
So I'm stopping the recording now. Thank you, Rujuta. Thank you, Saee, for our first webinar from the Indian Pastoralist Network. It's been a great discussion. We can go on informally for a few more minutes for sure.